Hey, welcome back to Ecommerce on Tap, brought to you by Sourcify and Izba. I'm your host, Nathan Resnick, joined by my co-host, Aaron Alpeter. Today on Ecommerce on Tap, we've got a pretty exciting episode, Alo Yoga. This is kind of part of our Athleisure series that we're doing here. And before we dive in, Aaron, do you want to give a quick overview of what Ecommerce on Tap is for those that are tuning in for the first time?
Yeah, it's really one of the highlights of my week. I really enjoy it. We do a really deep dive into a well-known company. Usually they've got D2C origins. And what Nathan and I do is we tell their founding story, reverse engineer their supply chain, and then talk about their exit potential.
So before we do that, this episode, Aaron and I have gotten so many calls around what is going on with these tariffs. We did an emergency pod last week, just really deep diving on tariffs, our thoughts on them, how we're seeing different brands react. Aaron, what's the latest on tariffs?
Yeah, I mean, as of today when we're recording this, the U.S. has walked back some of the tariffs a little bit more. So obviously they remain very, very elevated on China. I think 145% is where it stands. Although there is an exemption for electronics, which is the number one category of exports from China. And so you kind of read this any way you want. This is either the Trump administration giving the Chinese a window, right, to say, hey, we're here to negotiate, or it's a capitulation because this is the stuff that we actually need. And whether or not Tim Cook and other people kind of said, hey, we should, you shouldn't do this because we supported you, or this is all part of some grand bargain. I guess we'll find out.
We will definitely find out. In my opinion, I think Tim Cook's got a direct line to Trump and said, hey, you can't do this on electronics, but we'll see. I just know so many e-commerce brands that are really scrambling to figure this out, and there is no clear answer yet. I think one of the challenges with these tariffs is, tariffs in general, one of the goals is to bring manufacturing back, but even if a brand were to have the capital to do that and then undertake that process, by the time that they open up their own facility here in the States, Trump might not, his presidency might be over and tariffs might be gone, right? And so this kind of strategic move that you see a lot of, larger scale brands thinking about might not even make sense in the long term. And I think what's really happening and happened in 2018 when we saw these tariffs is most of these brands are looking for sources outside of China and outside of the States. And so they're looking at, Vietnam and India and Cambodia. And, matter of fact is a lot of these factories outside of China in Southeast Asia, like Cambodia and the Philippines, are Chinese owned anyway. So it's just an interesting dynamic. And in my personal opinion, I don't think we're going to hold these tariffs this high because I just don't see how American businesses can sustain to pay so much higher for their imported goods.
Yeah, it's interesting because you bring up a really good point, and I think that the problem with the tariffs is also the reason why we have tariffs. Like the reason that we're able to have these dramatic changes in the tariffs is because the president has declared that they can change tariffs under an emergency. Well, the fact that they can be changed so easily gives you the uncertainty that kind of is a cross current against what they want to do. And so, I really think the only way that they're going to be able to reshore American manufacturing in the way that they want to is to pass a law or have a Supreme Court decision that basically says, yeah, the president can't do this. This is something that Congress needs to do. And then Congress passes a law and just says, here's what's going to be. And, you know, I was talking with a friend last week that they run a very large, well-known brand. You probably use them. And they were saying, okay, we source from China. We want to, try to look at building something in the U.S. And so we kind of walked through that and said, okay, well, where are your raw materials coming from? Like China. Okay, well, let's see if we can find your raw materials first. And then they've got proprietary process and all these other things. But we said, even if we think we can get all of that sorted out, you're probably looking at 3 to 5 years from when you decide to start building a factory to when you're actually producing stuff. And so they're kind of frozen because it's like, well, do we think the tariffs are going to be around for 5 years? And not only that, but do we think they're going to be around for the next 20 years or 30 years, which is, kind of the lifespan of a factory. And it's really difficult because people are just kind of frozen. And so, when the tariffs can change from day to day or week to week, it's really hard for any business to take this sort of action seriously.
Yeah, we will see how it plays out and continue to keep a pulse on it. And for context, we are recording on the morning of Monday, April 14th, just for those that listen in the future. So with Alo Yoga, I mean, this story is just pretty incredible. I don't know, Aaron, did you screen print t-shirts or anything like that growing up?
I consumed them. I think I had a lot of cross country and track shirts with various things, but actually, Sourcify, the GM of Sourcify, Steven, he had a screen printing T-shirt business for a little while, so he had a lot to say on Alo.
Yeah, I think it's it's pretty, common starting point for those that start, apparel and fashion businesses. And I've screen printed when I was younger too. And in the case of the Alo Yoga founders, Danny Harris and Marco DeGeorge, that, they grew up in Los Gatos, California. They started a small business just screen printing shirts for local shops. And that's kind of their side hustle, that straight out of high school grew into a successful apparel manufacturing company called Color Image Apparel. And they, through this holding co, launched what is now the largest blank t-shirt manufacturer in the US, called Bella Plus Canvas. And what's crazy is that this business they basically launched, when they were young, is now doing over 300 million today, still owned by them. It's just pretty incredible to start screen printing from a young age, and then now they own the largest blank t-shirt manufacturer in the US. I just wanted to start there because I thought it was so fascinating that not only do they own a multi-billion-dollar yoga company, but they also, own the largest blank t-shirt manufacturer in the US.
Yeah, what did you do in high school? Did you have a side hustle?
Yeah, I was flipping Live Strong bracelets at one point, so those were super popular. And then flipping sneakers. I was, a sneakerhead, as you can still see some sneakers in my background. And then got into, hats and watches and all sorts of different, fashion accessories that I was flipping. And I would think, I was super into it. I still am a sneakerhead.
Yeah, well, I mean, to that extent, you kind of that was the seed for the idea behind Sourcify. I mean, I did stuff like mowing lawns and picking up sticks and other random stuff like that. Had a while there where I was chopping fire with my grandpa, but that never turned into a multi-million-dollar business, let alone the afterthought business that we're talking about today.
Yeah. No, it's pretty incredible. And so the way Danny and Marco first got into yoga, which is, obviously the kind of the type of fitness that Alo Yoga really, started around. Danny was basically recovering and trying to manage his anxiety, whereas Marco had a serious back injury and leaned towards yoga to help with his injury. And so this was around 2007, and they saw a gap in the market for quality yoga apparel. And, for them being in the apparel industry, they decided to mix something that they love with something that we're good at, and making, these products, as they put it. And so, at the time, Lululemon was around, and they were experiencing over 75% growth and had annual revenue of over 450 million. And so, the Lulu was the market leader, and it still is in this category. I mean, today Lululemon does over $11 billion in sales, and Alo Yoga, as we'll find out, is a few billion in sales, which is still tremendous and huge, but a much different story than Lululemon. And so, I think it's just pretty incredible because we all hear a lot about the merits of repeat founders, but we rarely hear about founders who incubate and launch successful brands under the same holding company. I mean, what makes their story so remarkable here?
Well, I think there's a lot, right? I think the part that gets me is, imagine if you were in 2007, and I think that was the year that Lululemon went public as well. And you see this company, they're doing hundreds of millions of dollars. They're growing at 75% year over year. Everybody's talking about Lulu, and they say, "Yeah, why not us too?" And I think that having that experience and mindset to not seed the market and say there's room for lots of folks. It doesn't have to be only Lulu. I think that you get that by having repeat founders who also have a deep apparel background. And so it's just really interesting to me that I think other founders may have seen the exact same information and be like, well, we were too late. Someone else took that market. But these guys said, nope, nope, we can do it as well.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible how they grew Alo Yoga, right? In the late 2000s and early 2010s, they grew more as a niche yoga brand, right? And betting on word of mouth and sending apparel to yoga instructors and celebrities. And, this strategy paid off when stars like Taylor Swift and Gigi Hadid were spotted in Alo's stylish yoga pants. And these unsolicited celebrity sightings gave Alo a huge exposure. And so, I think there was probably some strategy behind their efforts here. But I mean, it's just pretty incredible how gifting products to tastemakers is something that so many brands do, but very few succeed at. And, Alo Yoga got noticed here doing that.
Yeah, I think part of it was the timing, right? So in the early 2010s, influencer marketing was still in its infancy. Again, remember, Facebook and Instagram really don't become a thing until 2010, 2011, 2012. I mean, Shopify is just a dream at this point. And so there's a lot here, I think, around the timing and the moment where they could send something that was new and unique, and the likelihood that these celebrities were going to pick it up was fairly high, or at least use it. I wonder if it's different today because this is a well-worn area, and I wonder how many of these samples actually make it to the end celebrity versus just going to their manager or their friends or things like that. But I think that the idea here is that in order to stick out, you've got to have some uniqueness about it. It can't just be, hey, these are great leggings. These are really need to be something that speaks to them. And so Alo, which stands for air, land, and ocean, they've got this really unique vibe around, hey, we've got this lifestyle that we're pushing. We really want to help people feel good about themselves and yoga and things like that. And so I think that there's probably something more to just, hey, here's some clothes. Do you want to wear them? I'm sure these influencer boxes had information, videos, things about kind of who they are, what they were trying to do, and why they thought that they would like them. But I think that if you go back and look at where Alo started, they're really known for leggings, and that's kind of the same place that Lululemon started as well. But they've also methodically expanded their product lines over time. In 2015, they launched their men's collection, and they recognized that yoga and athleisure weren't just for women. And so this move really broadened the market for them and was pretty well received. So I think yoga pants and hoodies for men really became a staple. And again, I think the timing here is interesting because they launched theirs in 2015. Lululemon launched their men's line in 2014. And Vuori, which was exclusively men's focused up until a few years ago, was also launched in 2015. And so this put Alo really among the leaders when it came to building the men's yoga market. And, as I look at this, you're going to see this theme over and over again where it's like Lulu and then Alo, Lulu then Alo, Lulu then Alo. And obviously, Lululemon is much bigger than Alo. But having worked with Lululemon, I know that they consider Alo a serious competitor, a serious threat. And so I guess the question I have for you is, do you think that Alo had arrived on the same insight? Take men's fashion for an example. Do you think they arrived in that same insight, or did they see what happened and they were an efficient fast follower?
It's a really good question. I mean, I want to say that they arrived at the same insight, especially given that Danny and Marco were yoga enthusiasts themselves. But at the same time, if you look at the timeline, it is a very similar timeline in terms of how Lululemon and Alloy and even Vuori, launch and do things, right? And so even, for example, in 2017, they saw the rise of online fitness, and Alloy acquired a yoga coaching app called Cody and rebranded it as Alloy Moves. And so this, really gave them a direct channel to offer on-demand yoga classes and content. And as you can imagine, during COVID, this really grew into a popular subscription platform that created a community around their followers and user base who weren't just, wearing Alloy now, but also practicing, their yoga through the Alloy Moves yoga app. And so, I think this has kind of really become now a cornerstone of their brand, and especially, help them create an ecosystem around, people that wear their athleisure clothing, and they have a variety of classes in the app. And, it has actually been praised for the high quality of its instruction and user experience. I don't think it's something that they just, launched and put on the side. It's something they really focus on to engage their community. And I'm pretty sure too, Lululemon has a similar type of, app that they launched shortly before COVID. And so, it's interesting because if you look at both brands and you look at the lens in terms of what does one have and what does one not have, it's hard to see, the difference there in some sense. And they also both embraced, new technological advancements like, XR and MetaQuest kind of in a virtual reality type of setting for fitness. And so, I think there's definitely similar rationale there for, for example, Lulu's acquisition of Mirror, which I think you were a part of, Aaron. You got to share some tidbits on that too. And, do you think this kind of helped influence Alo's decision as well?
Yes, I was the VP of supply chain for Mirror for about 5 years. Took it from basically its launch all the way through the acquisition and then to the integration. So know this part of the story intimately well. I don't know during the due diligence piece if they were buying Mirror simply because Alo had something. I think there was a lot of other strategic value that was there, but I'm sure that it didn't not influence the decision, right? It wasn't the reason for it, but it was also something to take a look at. To kind of go back to the earlier point that you made, I kind of take the opposite view where I think Alo is a very efficient fast follower. And I think that's a great strategy. And I think it comes down to their expertise in their supply chain and their just knowing how to execute a business and having those relationships. And so if I were them, I would certainly not try to spend all the R&D money or the research to try to figure out what is going on, right? What is the next thing? I would wait for Lulu to come out with something, let them sink that cost in, and then be like, oh yeah, that seems like a good idea, and then launch something else 6 months later. And so I think in this space, it's growing so quickly that it's not necessarily something that being first is the winner takes most environment. I think this is yeah, they're doing it. It's a good idea. We're going to do it too. We're going to put our spin on it, and we can grow the market together.
Yeah, but I mean, Alo has launched a lot of its own kind of theses here, right? So they launched the Glow system, which is a clean skincare line featuring plant-based ingredients like alma berry, and they rolled out wellness supplements like powdered drinks and vitamins soon after. And so I think they're really trying to capitalize on the whole wellness lifestyle. Like, a customer might dress in Alo, they might also use products in the self-care routine that they have. They might also dine at their restaurant at Sutra, which is on the roof of their 4-story, 13,000 square foot Manhattan store in the Flatiron district. So the restaurant seems to be closed now, though. But
they had a restaurant,
yeah, and I mean maybe that was partially closed due to COVID, right? Because they launched it seems like in 2020, and Manhattan got hit real hard with COVID, and so they also produced their own podcast called Mindful that generates content and kind of cements their brand and image online. And so I think like for example in 2020, Harris told Forbes that the future is in the content, and so they're really I think trying to encompass this brand umbrella to make it so when someone thinks about yoga or thinks about wellness as a category, their name comes top of mind. And so one question that I have that I was just thinking about is, are there any examples of clothing brands that are launching their own skincare lines or restaurants? And is this kind of smart branding in your opinion, or just a lack of focus?
I can't think of anybody else that's selling stretchy pants and then you can eat them and then you can have a skincare routine. It's a good question. I think to some extent, it really comes down to how you're approaching it. So this reminds me like Shinola, the episode we did a few weeks ago, where they were intentionally going out and building bicycles, right? They make watches, but they're going out and building high-end bicycles as part of a branding thing, right? It helps people cement them and connect them with something else. And so I think that the way that separates this between being a distraction versus being smart branding is, do you have a set aside budget for this, right? If you look at this and say, all right, we're going to launch a restaurant, we're willing to put $2 million into this. And if it doesn't pay for itself, like we're going to shut it down. Like we're not going to divert excess resources, because I think the key thing beyond the money is you're taking the talent, usually of some of your best leadership, to go do something that they haven't done before. And so there's an element here. I mean, to me, it kind of feels like at this point in time, again, this is 2019, 2020, they're doing all this stuff. They're really reaching and trying to find something else to ignite growth. And they end up finding it in COVID. But before we move into kind of how COVID refocused their business, I'm curious, like, good idea, bad idea? Should all of our listeners who have an athleisure brand start to open up restaurants and skincare stuff?
Yeah, I mean, in my opinion, it's the difference between direct marketing and brand marketing, right? I think probably from a strategic standpoint, from a CMO level, their direct marketing spend was pretty tapped out, right? They were spending a lot on social already. They were engaging a ton of influencers. They needed to find other channels to really, grow their market share. And so they probably had, some discretionary budget to explore these other angles that were going to help around brand marketing and help around, building community and really, engaging with their audience more, especially in person. A lot of, what they did was really around, being in person and engaging with the brand in person. And so, I think that's kind of the key difference here that I think about. I think, until you're at that scale of, 100 plus or a few hundred million in revenue, typically you can, really just focus on direct marketing. And I think as you grow, that's when you have to engage from a brand marketing standpoint and really try to drive that engagement, outside of just, influencers and ads and find other channels to get more scale. And so, I think it was probably more of a strategic move from a brand standpoint rather than, hey, what's the direct ROI of having someone, come dine at our restaurant after they come to our headquarters in the Flatiron district. So, that's kind of my take in terms of probably how they strategically thought about what they were doing on that side. But I mean, you talked about COVID. I mean, how did COVID refocus this business? I mean, it's pretty remarkable.
Yeah, well, they were growing pretty steadily, but COVID was really an inflection point for all e-commerce brands, but in particular athleisure. So when people were stuck at home, they were prioritizing comfortable, casual wear, and so just demand for Alo exploded. They saw over 200% year-over-year growth in late 2020 compared to 2019. And just think about that. Like any demand planner, anybody just like, yeah, we're gonna not double, we're gonna grow by 200%. Its e-commerce sales surged as yoga studios and gyms were closed. And so this really leveled the playing field with competitors like Lululemon because everybody was competing online. And so they had a D2C native brand, and so they were probably well suited to take advantage of that compared to others. And they also had Alo Moves, which became a fantastic asset for them. And so they saw a 7x increase in signups in 2020. And in 2021, they landed at number 8 on Fast Company's World's Most Innovative Companies list. And so this was really because the pandemic, unlike for so many other brands, wasn't something that they had to deal with. It was really, okay, they saw the market change, they saw the demand change, and they were able to react and take advantage of it in a very creative way. I want to go back to something else we talked about just with the expansion here and the restaurants and things like that, because I think that there is an element where making some tangential, incremental progress makes a lot of sense and helps enhance the brand. Whereas if you go too far out, it might be a bit of a stretch. And so, if you look at what they did before the pandemic, they started opening retail stores in the late 2010s, and they did so with a twist. And so I think this is like a really good example of how they took these small bets that helped improve their brand marketing. So first, they didn't call their stores, they called them sanctuaries. And they weren't just retail space, but they had in-store yoga studios. And sometimes there'd be an organic, post-workout cafe. And so in these sanctuaries, they hosted classes, they had community events, and they were really built in such a way to drive engagement. So if you look at the flagship locations in LA and New York, they allowed people to take a yoga class upstairs and then immediately go shop the outfit they just wore downstairs. And if you look, post-pandemic, by October of 23, they had over 50 stores. And by early 2025, they have around 120 stores globally. So they're growing very aggressively. And about 90 of those stores are outside of the US. and they're expanding aggressively outside of the US, including Canada, Middle East, Europe. And they've got their first London store, which opened in 23. And they just got a lot of stuff that's going that way. So I think that's a really good example of taking those small incremental bets that enhance the brand and are kind of right there. And so I think that might be a good guideline for how brands should think about stretching and doing things a little bit different.
Yeah, no, it's great points. I mean, I think too, they tried to, take their brand in different ways and angles than other companies like Lululemon. So, they really leaned into being fashion focused. And so, they gained credibility in high fashion circles by partnering, for example, with the New York Fashion Week. So in September 2021, they became New York Fashion Week's official wellness partner, hosting yoga and meditation events within the fashion community. In 2022, they introduced the Aspen collection, which was like a luxury ski wear capsule. And then in 2023, they launched Alo Atelier. This was a 62-piece luxury ready-to-wear collection with items like silk pajamas, cashmere sweaters, and wool coats. And, I think this really signifies that they saw themselves not just as athletic wear, but kind of a crossover fashion brand. And I think you continue to see this with people wearing athleisure clothing, not just to the gym, but, to lunch or to work or, really wherever nowadays, I feel like. And I mean, it's pretty amazing because they've done quite a bit to push their brand forward. What else kind of caught your eye that you saw?
Yeah, in the research, they've done a lot of kind of annual invite only wellness festivals. And so they call it Alo House. So again, this branding of Alo, everything that they're going through. And so this is where they bring in influencers and yogis for a week of classes, talks, and basically just amplifying Alo's cool factor. So think of it as a yoga conference is kind of what they do. In May 2023, you might be interested in this one. They debuted their first sneaker line, which is a unisex lifestyle shoe. And so this was their foray into the athletic footwear arena. And in 24, they pivoted to what they call a recovery sneaker, which is designed for post-workout comfort. I don't know about you, but I typically wear the same shoes from my workout as I wore to my workout. But if people need special recovery sneakers, I'm not here to judge.
Yeah, I mean, I think it might be to wear after the yoga studio or something because most people don't wear shoes in yoga, so
That's
maybe
true.
that was their thinking. But I mean, they did definitely pivot from making it a real sneaker to a recovery sneaker.
Yeah.
And then during the crypto boom, they started accepting crypto as a payment on their e-commerce site. Um, and I think this was, really they saw that their target demographic was into crypto. And so they said, hey, let's accept this as a form of payment. They also launched a virtual store on Roblox, which I thought was pretty crazy. So this was their sanctuary that launched in the kind of gaming metaverse world. This was at the time where everyone was talking about the metaverse. I mean, Facebook rebranded to Meta. So definitely very, very timely there. But they did see, so many people attending their digital yoga classes. I mean, over 55 million visits, which I think kind of really blends this marketing channel with a futuristic shopping experience. And Harris, the CEO, likens them to kind of the Tesla of athleisure for their willingness to push new tech and ideas. And so, I think in general, they try to be innovative. They try to lean into where their customers are at, and they try to, really create brand awareness across every channel that they can. I mean, I think it's very rare where you have a brand going on the metaverse on Roblox to launch their own metaverse store. And so, I mean, there's definitely competition between them and Lululemon, right? I mean, how do you see them different? How do you see them similar? Are they basically the same?
Well, they both sell stretchy pants, but they occupy completely different parts of the market. So if you look at this, and I think this is instructive, just in like athleisure is such a big category, and it's easy to think that every company is the exact same. But if you look at Alo and Lululemon, they have they have adjacent focuses, I guess I'd say. So Lululemon is much more performance rooted and focused on inclusive functional gear for real workouts. They want you to wear their stuff to the gym. Their core demo is 25 to 45, mainly women. And their main growth lever has been in their community stores. So they're very well known for their local ambassador programs, and then brand loyalty through performance and quality and things like that. You mentioned this earlier, and Alo takes a different approach, right? They really lean into fashion and lifestyle. And so, Lululemon wants you to go work out. Alo wants you to look like you worked out, but it's really appealing to a younger, trendier consumer. And so their core demo is about 18 to 25. It's almost entirely women. And their growth lever has really been around celebrity and influencer heavy. So I think Kendall Jenner, Hailey Bieber, they've got strong Instagram, YouTube presences. They've got very experimental retail offerings, like you talked about. So Alo House and Alo Sanctuary, and they're digital first fitness. So for Alo Moods, and so like I said, Alo is much more of a fashion focused athleisure brand, while Lululemon is an exercise focused athleisure brand.
Yeah, I think to me, what stands out the most from this whole story is Color Image Apparel, which is Danny and Marco's kind of holding company, owns and still owns 100% Alo as well as Bella and Canvas. And so there's, limited data on margin and revenue. However, we can look at, their public peer competitors to gain insights into each. And I mean, it's just pretty incredible. So they sell most of their pieces, for example, for about $100 to $128. We assume their gross margin is about 50 to 60%. So probably from the factory X works, they're paying about $20 to $30. But if you look over their milestones and their growth, it is just remarkable. So the company was founded in 2007. 2019, we saw estimates of about 65 million in revenue. 2020, they grew like crazy during COVID. They estimated about $200 million in revenue. And 2021, the company nearly doubled its business. Fast Company reports the company revenue was over $500 million. 2021, according to the Wall Street Journal, their sales surpassed $1 billion. And by 2023, their parent company, Color Image Apparel, was reportedly generating nearly $2 billion in annual revenue. And that's per a Forbes estimate. And so, to put this into perspective here a bit, they're still smaller than Lululemon, which did $8 billion in 2022, but they've definitely eclipsed other upstarts like Gymshark and Fabletics and, even older athletic brands as well. And so it's pretty just remarkable to see their growth during COVID. I mean, their 2023 revenue was 10x what it was in 2020, which is just an unheard of growth trajectory. And so to me, I think number one, it is incredible that the founders still own 100% of the business. I mean, I just want to do a double click there, because to see the scale that they've gotten to without having to, take on outside investors and really, own their own path and destiny here is just remarkable. I don't know of another brand that has gotten to the scale that, is still owned 100% by its founders like this. And so I just wanted to double click there. But their supply chain is really unique, and kind of the tie-in with Bella and Canvas is pretty interesting. Where do we start from their supply chain? Where do you want to dive in here?
Yeah, well, I think just as a note, I think Jeff Bezos probably owns 100% of Blue Origin. But to that extent, it's these guys built something that was profitable from day one, and they didn't start with a huge fortune to get it going. So I think it's really remarkable what you said. I loved this story when we were digging into the supply chain of it, and I think that in order to really understand Alo and Bella and Canvas, it's like a perfect synopsis of athleisure and kind of how manufacturing could look like in apparel in the future. So one of their superpowers is the vertically integrated supply chain. And so Harrison to George, they leveraged their existing manufacturing firm, like Colored Image Apparel, to initially produce the Alo goods. And despite these brands both being apparel brands, the businesses and the supply chain strategies couldn't be more different. And so again, Bella and Canvas's main business is supplying blank T-shirts to print-on-demand companies, and they really took an America Strong approach to manufacturing. There's a lot of good press that they've gotten over the years, LA Times, elsewhere, but they're headquartered in Los Angeles, and they source the cotton and yarns from the U.S., including Parkdale Mills, I believe, in South Carolina. and they get greige materials sourced from partners in California as well as India and Central America. And they've intentionally chosen their partners for the greige to be in areas with free trade agreements with the U.S. And so the idea is that they can avoid uh, tariffs and all the other stuff that usually comes up. But they source those materials. They bring all the dyeing and cutting into LA. They do that there. And their process only uses about 3 gallons of water per pound of fabric, which is 2 to 5 times less than the traditional process. So, they're doing a lot, and it's efficient. Their cutting and sewing facility is done at a massive campus in Los Angeles, which employs about 1,000 people. I guess 1,000 people compared to what they do in Bangladesh is nothing, but I think that's pretty big for any employer in LA. And this factory can precision cut about 3 million garments a week. And it's very highly automated. They call it the most advanced cutting facility in North America. I don't know if there are too many other cutting facilities in North America, but they certainly are claiming to be the most advanced. But they also take kind of bulk production, so they'll dye it. They'll send some stuff down to Nicaragua for the assembly, and then they'll bring it back to LA for final quality inspection. So, you normally don't think of large scale apparel manufacturing in the U.S., let alone California. Everybody's talking, everybody loves to hate California. But do you think this is a template for what the U.S. could expect if manufacturing were to come back?
It's a good question. I mean, when I think of U.S. manufacturing, I think of more, Detroit and these kind of middle America cities. And so to see it done in LA is definitely surprising and shocking. I mean, I think there's, there's been proven so many reasons why not to, start a manufacturing facility in California, just with regulation and, prices and everything in that regard. And so, I think it's amazing to see that they are able to do this in LA, but I think for the average brand and company, they're not going to be looking in LA to stand up a manufacturing facility. I think they're going to go to a city that has much less regulation, lower labor costs, and much less building rules and permits that are required. And so, I think possibly because they've been doing this in LA for so long that they've been able to grow here. But I think in general, when I think about bringing manufacturing back to the States, I don't think about doing it in a major hub like LA.
Yeah, it is interesting with real estate prices in their own right. I mean, keep in mind that California is still the number one manufacturing state in the U.S. Granted, there's a lot of people in California, so there's that benefit to it. But I wouldn't count California out from a manufacturing point of view. But I think that this is a really interesting template for what the future of U.S. manufacturing could look like. I think the key thing here is automation. And so they're doing precision things here, but then they're also leveraging low-cost nearshore countries. And so they're getting the benefit of that lower labor for the assembly process. And so I think that if the U.S. can create a trade regime where, maybe it's the Western Hemisphere is tightly integrated and companies are able to have a free flow of finished and non-finished goods going across the border to basically take advantage of the right things that need to be done, I think it could be very interesting from that perspective.
Yeah, and I mean their distribution strategy too is pretty incredible, right? So Bell and Canvas is rumored to hold up to 100 million pieces of garments in inventory in order to maintain a responsive turnaround time for their print-on-demand customers. And this is a huge, huge inventory investment. But their products are relatively cheap, so I would think it levels out. But still, that's a ton of garments to hold in inventory, and they operate distribution facilities in LA, Las Vegas, as well as Maryland. And so, hearing this, I kind of thought, oh, that's odd. Is this how Alo products are produced as well? But it's very different. Do you want to touch on their
Yeah,
supply
it's
chain?
completely different. I think this is a great example of why some products can be made in North America and some products can't. They took a completely different approach, and they still do the design in LA, and some of the key pieces are prototyped here. But by and large, most of the manufacturing, if not all the manufacturing, is done by specialized manufacturers in Vietnam, China, and other Southeast Asian countries. Um, so whereas Bella and Canvas, they own stakes in the factories in Nicaragua and things like that. Alo doesn't have any equity exposure to their Asian partners. And these companies also produce for other athleisure brands or activewear labels. I'm sure you've seen a lot of stuff on TikTok this weekend where there's a lot of factories that are coming out and just showing like, hey, we make Lululemon stuff here. We make it for Puma and Philo and Under Armour. And so you have this ecosystem where there are a lot of common, very specialized manufacturers that are producing for everybody. So there's relatively low differences in the quality or the craftsmanship of what's being produced, although the materials could change.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's crazy because I think a lot of people hearing the story of Bella and Canvas thought, oh, wow, I didn't know Alo was produced, in the States too, but definitely not. I mean, and there's a lot of reasons as to why not, right? So, number one, the athleisure supply chain really runs through Asia. They just have so much technical expertise and lower cost of labor that is needed for this technical type of apparel. And then you look at the raw material sources, it all stems from Asia as well. And so, I think their supply chain has to be really coordinated and intensive and, very tight knit way. And, not to say that also manufacturing in America needs that as well. But, I think it's just there's so much of a difference when you're working with a contract manufacturer versus running your own facility. You even look at the financial undertakings and just the overhead of running your own facility versus working with a contract manufacturer. And so, I think it is definitely possible for them to invest and try to bring some of their manufacturing back to the States. But I would just say, if you look at where pretty much every athleisure brand is manufactured, it's all done in Asia. And so I think it would be very rare for these companies, to bring production back to the States in this way, just because Asian factories have such a strong hold on this industry.
Right. And it's not just the assembly piece, it's the manufacturing piece. It's the actual creation of the fibers and the threads and the yarn and all that sort of stuff. And so there is an enormous amount of investment that would have to be made to do this. But as you mentioned, not building it yourself allows you to be flexible and to kind of find the best partners quicker. And so, whereas I think that part of the reason that Bella and Canvas is the way it is I don't know if it was intentional. They said, hey, we're going to start this business in high school and we're going to end up employing 1,000 people to cut and sew. It was probably something where it grew organically and it did a little bit at a time, a little bit at a time. And they got to where they are now. And I think that with Alo, they wanted to go much bigger, much faster. And so they said, okay, we're going to not invest all that CapEx. We're not going to worry about that problem. And we're just going to find the partners that can help us get to where we want to get to very, very quickly. And so that's kind of where they ended up.
Yeah. And I mean, I think the brands share kind of core principles in terms of how they think about, fair labor conditions. Like, for example, they won a platinum certificate from the Worldwide Responsible Accredited Production RAP for maintaining the highest standards in its sewing facilities. So, they definitely really keep a strong eye on, workforce conditions and labor conditions and making sure that they have, a environmentally sustainable approach. And so I think that stood out to me as well as I looked at their supply chain. Like, for example, in production, Alo uses low impact dyes and has moved over time towards more sustainable materials. And even at the retail level, they do this by, contributing eco to its ethos. So their sanctuary cafes are all plant-based and 100% organic. And so I think they've really done this throughout their business to be environmentally minded and, ensure that their workforce conditions meets their standards, across their whole supply chain.
Yeah. And I think it's an interesting piece here because there is this tension, right? They built a very successful business by basically being vertically integrated and owning everything. And now they had to build a different muscle to rely on outside partners that are in many cases producing for their competitors as well. And so they've done some really interesting things to make up for some of the lack of control that they have. And so if you take the sewing facilities as an example, those are all based in South Asia and Central America. But unlike other fast fashion retailers, they have really leaned on to the RAP guidelines and just said, we know that there's other people that could make this. They could probably make it cheaper, but we want to focus on people who have this certification. They've also developed, franchised fabrics or proprietary fabrics that help set their products apart. So their airbrush and airlift fabric blends are used in the leggings. They're known for being sculpting and yet comfortable. And they're primarily a D2C business as well, so they can control that thread of ownership and conversation and brand equity that way, as opposed to going wholesale. Just a little bit more about their D2C. So about 98% of their sales come through their own channels. So that includes the website and their physical stores. And they have a minimal wholesale or third-party retail presence. And they do leverage the Bell and Canvas warehouses. And so that's a really natural thing to do. They have these massive, almost 700, 800,000 square foot warehouses across the country. And so they've co-located the inventory. And they've also done some really smart stuff with their stores where, based on the research I could see, they're using them to almost service as mini distribution hubs. So they're allowing people to buy online, pick up in store, ship from store, things like that. And so they're able to be very efficient, hold less inventory, and do some interesting things that way.
Yeah, it is pretty cool to see. And they've also tapped into international growth. So they've, both had their in-house approach as well as with strategics abroad. So for example, in Dubai and Abu Dhabi, they partnered with the Kuwait-based Athleisure group, which is a major retail operator there. And then, in Europe, they're serving their customers through e-commerce and pop-ups. And just in 2023, started opening their own stores. So, just incredible growth. I'm curious, what I was thinking at the back of my mind, what's the exit here? Are they going public? Are they going to get acquired? What looks like the long-term plan for them?
Yeah, it's interesting. In October of 23, news broke that the founders had hired an investment bank, Moelis & Co., to basically explore options. And we're in talk with investors that was valuing Alo Yoga at about $10 billion. And so if you look at that valuation is about 10x revenue. And that is really a testament to their strong brand and their growth prospects. At the same time, Lululemon was trading for about 5x revenue. So they were, investors in theory were looking at this as twice as attractive as Lululemon. And it was rumored that these potential suitors included large private equity firms, sovereign wealth funds, etc. But by early 2024, it was reported that no deal materialized, and the founders had opted not to accept outside investment at the time. So I don't know if the deal came back and it was lower than the 10 billion, if they said, yeah, we think we can do more, or they didn't like the partners that were kind of putting stuff down there. I'm not sure what the deals were, but I kind of wondered, like, do you think they were serious, or were they just testing the waters here to basically float to say, how much do we think this thing is actually worth?
Yeah, it's a good question. I would think with an investment banker like that, there's either some, fixed fee or upfront cost for the work that they're doing. So my gut tells me they must have been serious. I don't know if they were trying to sell the whole business or just, pull some cash out by selling some equity and finding a great partner. And so, I think they definitely were serious, but it is remarkable that they are still 100% founder owned and privately held. And, as of 2025, I haven't seen either founder signal an immediate desire to step away. And what I thought was fascinating about their whole story is they both actually run the company as co-CEOs, which we've now seen a few times, as we've gone into these stories on e-commerce on tap. And, it seems like that model works for a lot of founders.
It certainly can. How do you think they were able to build two large businesses while still owning 100%?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think because both these businesses kind of tied into each other with different, market focuses. I don't know, because on one hand, I feel like they are very, congruent. On the other hand, I'm like, these are totally different markets. But I think from a distribution and supply chain standpoint, it makes a lot of sense. I think from an actual go-to-market standpoint, it doesn't make sense at all. And so, that's kind of my takeaway there. I from what I've seen on LinkedIn, they have, completely separate leadership teams for the most part, but they definitely co-utilize, back-end resources.
I think the key thing here is that they had a profitable business first, right? And so it doesn't matter if that profitable business is a McDonald's franchise or a blank T-shirt company. I think if you've got something that's stable and you can still invest in that business, but you've got excess profits, you're trying to figure out what to do. I think that's where you still get to the point where you're like, all right, like, well, what do we think we can do? Should we put this in the market? Should we get into real estate? We're actually really good at building apparel brands and product. Let's try this yoga thing. And so I think that was really the key there is profitability and making sure that they were tight to it. And it's, certainly something that is easier said than done. But I think ultimately, given where Alo is now, they're almost getting to a point where an IPO makes a lot of sense, and you've started to see movement in that direction. So if you look at Viore, they've secured a SoftBank investment at a $4 billion valuation as of last year, and they're reportedly planning for an IPO. If Alo went public at $10 billion, it'd be one of the largest fashion IPOs in recent years, and certainly be the largest yoga athleisure one since Lulu IPO'd in 2007. So there's some really interesting things here. Do you get the sense that someone could just decide to acquire Alo outright? I mean, they're kind of right at that cusp where there are a few players that be willing to write a check for $10 billion versus, if it's 50 billion, you're just going to IPO and you become too big to acquire in most cases.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's only a few potential suitors at this point, right? I mean, Nike could potentially, see this as a strategic move here, but I think they have a lot of, competing products. So I'm not quite sure how that would align. Or a luxury group like LVMH, for example, could come in and see this as a great step into the booming wellness sector with an established brand. And so, there are a handful of suitors, but my gut tells me at this scale, they either will work with, a large PE or decide to go public at some point. I mean, what's your take here?
I mean, honestly, if you were these founders, why would you look to sell? Is kind of my question. It seems that they've got a platform that is building and doing well, and so I would keep doing that. I think ultimately it comes down to that motivation for wanting to sell. If they're done either working with each other or they're just done working, then yeah, you want to take your chips off the table and go do something different. But I think that I would suspect that they have bigger aims than that. And so if they were looking to sell a portion of their business and use those proceeds to go start something else, or perhaps the idea is to get some investment into Alo to really go after Lululemon, that's, I think, where it makes sense. And so I don't get the sense that they are hurting for money on a personal level and looking to do other stuff. To me, it really looks like they are gearing up for a bigger fight, and they want to take Lululemon's crown. And so this is the element where they're potentially looking at getting some more dry powder to do so.
Yeah, I mean, I love this story. I think it's just incredible to see their growth. It's incredible to see how they've implemented go-to-market across all their different channels and the challenges that they faced, and just the tremendous growth that they had through COVID. I mean, that was a huge catalyst for their growth, right? If you look at their revenue numbers during those years. And so I love this episode of E-commerce on Tap. I mean, this is, kind of the start of our athleisure season here. And so I think this is one of the coolest stories we could cover, during this season. And, Aaron and I, we really enjoy doing these and we want more people to hear about them. So take a second right now, go into your Apple Podcast app or your Spotify app and leave us a rating and review. We want to hear what you think. We want to hear what companies we should cover next. We've heard a lot from our audience about, the jewelry brands that we did last season with Jackson and Shinola that were super fun to cover. And, we always enjoy hearing from people that are tuning in. So thank you again for listening in to this episode of E-commerce on Tap, brought to you by Sourcify and Izba. Please, get some rest during this time of tariffs. We are here to help. And, I think both of our phones have been going off the hook the past week and a half, but we're always happy to help people and love hearing from people that are tuning in. So thank you again. And we'll see you next time on E-commerce on Tap, brought to you by Sourcify and Izba.